Imagine living in a time where taking a bath was considered suspicious, where animals could be put on trial, and even the kind of clothes you wore could land you in serious trouble. Welcome to the medieval world, an era full of strange, unbelievable, and sometimes downright hilarious laws. But let's be clear, the Middle Ages weren't just about knights in shining armor or castles with tall towers. They were also about strict rules and regulations that shaped every single part of daily life. Ordinary people had to constantly worry about what they wore, what they ate, when they could go outside, and even what they whispered to their neighbors. Break the wrong rule and you could find yourself fined, punished, or humiliated in front of the whole town. These laws tell us a lot about how society worked back then. Leaders wanted control, the church wanted obedience, and the people simply tried to survive without getting into trouble. Some of the laws may sound funny to us now, but to people in the medieval era, they were deadly serious. In this video, we're diving into some of the most bizarre rules that governed people's lives hundreds of years ago. Stay with us till the end, because you won't believe just how weird some of these laws were. The bathing ban. In medieval Europe, bathing was often discouraged, and sometimes even outright forbidden. Believe it or not, certain rulers and church leaders declared that taking too many baths wasn't just unhealthy, but also sinful. People back then had very different ideas about health and hygiene. They believed that water could actually carry disease into the body through the pores, so the less you bathed, the safer you supposedly were. Some towns went so far as to ban public bathhouses altogether. These places weren't just seen as health risks, they were also viewed as centers of immorality. Bathhouses were sometimes associated with gambling, drinking, and even prostitution. For the authorities, banning them was a way to enforce both public health and strict moral codes. As a result, regular bathing became suspicious. If you were someone who washed too often, your neighbors might whisper that you were strange or even hiding sinful behavior. Imagine living in a time where being clean made people think you were guilty of something. Of course, not everyone followed these rules. The wealthy elite sometimes had their own private baths, and in certain regions, people still visited rivers or hot springs. But for the average villager, staying dirty wasn't laziness. It was the law. So while today we think cleanliness is a sign of health and respectability, in the Middle Ages, skipping your bath might have been the safer and more socially acceptable choice. Animals on trial. One of the strangest and most unbelievable practices of the medieval world was the idea of putting animals on trial. Yes, actual legal trials just like humans. If a pig, dog, goat, or even a rooster was accused of causing harm, they could be arrested, assigned a lawyer, and then judged in a courtroom. Sounds absurd, right? But for people back then, this was a way to show that law and order applied to all creatures. There are historical records of pigs being publicly executed for attacking children. In one case from the 15th century, a sow was dressed in human clothes before being hanged, as if the punishment needed to mirror human justice. It wasn't just farm animals either. Insects and rodents were also charged. Locusts that destroyed crops were sometimes formally excommunicated by priests, and rats were even summoned to appear in court. Of course, the rats never showed up, and their lawyers sometimes argued that it was unsafe for them to travel. As ridiculous as this seems to us today, medieval societies believed that crime had to be punished, no matter the offender. By putting animals on trial, they thought they were enforcing divine justice and maintaining order in their communities. To them, not holding animals accountable would have been like letting chaos win. Clothing control, the sumptuary laws. In the Middle Ages, even the clothes you wore were strictly monitored, not just by fashion trends, but by law. These laws were known as sumptuary laws, and they dictated what people could or could not wear based entirely on their social rank. The idea was simple. Your outfit had to reflect your place in society. For example, only the nobility were allowed to wear luxurious fabrics like velvet, silk, or ermine fur. Bright colours such as purple or gold were often reserved exclusively for royalty because they were expensive to produce and symbolised power. Meanwhile, commoners were expected to wear simple, dull fabrics like wool or linen. If a farmer or merchant was caught wearing something too fancy, they could face heavy fines, public shame, or even harsher punishments. These laws weren't about style at all, they were about control. The kings and lords wanted to make sure the boundaries between the classes stayed visible at all times. Clothing became a tool of separation. Even if a merchant became wealthy, he still wasn't allowed to dress like a noble, because wealth alone didn't grant him status. It was a way of reminding people that birth mattered more than success. Sometimes the rules became incredibly detailed, down to the type of buttons, the length of a sleeve, or the kind of hat one could wear. In England, during the reign of Edward III, even middle-class citizens were restricted in the colours and fabrics they could use, no matter how much money they had. Looking back, it seems ridiculous that someone could be punished for wearing the wrong outfit. But in the rigid social structure of the Middle Ages, fashion wasn't just a matter of taste, it was literally the law. Forbidden foods. Food might seem like a personal choice today, but in the Middle Ages, even what you ate could be regulated by law. Believe it or not, there were strict rules about who could eat what and when. These weren't just religious traditions, they were legally enforced practices that shaped everyday life. One of the most famous examples was Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter in the Christian calendar. During this time, eating meat was strictly forbidden. People were expected to live on fish, grains, vegetables, and bread. Anyone caught sneaking meat during Lent could be fined, shamed, or even face harsher punishments depending on the local ruler. In fact, records show butchers being punished for secretly selling beef or pork during this season. But the restrictions didn't end with religion. In some regions, the number of courses a household was allowed to serve at dinner was controlled by law. The reasoning? Authorities didn't want wealthy merchants or commoners to appear too rich or compete with nobles. A middle-class family could be fined if their feast looked more extravagant than what their social rank permitted. Certain foods were also tied directly to status. Exotic spices like saffron, cinnamon, or pepper were considered luxuries meant only for the upper classes. If a farmer was caught using them, it could raise suspicion. Bread itself was divided by class too. The rich ate soft white bread while the poor had coarse dark loaves. So while today we might argue about fast food versus healthy eating, in the medieval world, your dinner table wasn't just about appetite. It was a statement of loyalty, obedience, and class, with the law watching every bite you took. The curfew bell. Imagine living in a town where the ringing of a single bell decided when your day ended. In many medieval European towns, this was a reality. Every evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, the curfew bell would toll, echoing through narrow streets and market squares. Its message was clear: close your shops, put out your fires, and get inside. The word curfew comes from the old French phrase couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. And that was no metaphor. Towns were crowded, homes were built mostly of wood, and open flames were everywhere. A single spark could turn into a devastating fire, wiping out entire neighborhoods. To prevent disaster, the law required households to extinguish or cover their hearth fires at the sound of the bell. But fire safety wasn't the only motive. Authorities also used the curfew bell to keep order after dark. Nighttime was considered dangerous. The streets were unlit, crime was harder to control, and people feared everything from thieves to wandering spirits. By forcing citizens indoors, rulers could tighten control, reduce crime, and maintain authority over the population. Laws against gossip. In today's world, gossip might cause drama in families or workplaces, but in the Middle Ages, it could land you in serious trouble with the law. Many medieval towns had strict rules against spreading rumours, slandering neighbours, or publicly insulting someone's reputation. Why? Because in small, tightly knit communities, words carried enormous weight. A single rumour could ruin a person's social standing, harm their business, or even spark violence between families. Authorities saw gossip as a dangerous spark that could ignite chaos. So they passed laws to control it, and the punishments were as strange as they were harsh. One of the most notorious punishments was the scold's bridle. This bizarre contraption looked like a metal cage that fit over a person's head. It had an iron bit that went into the mouth, preventing the victim from speaking. The idea was simple. If you couldn't keep your mouth shut, the law would shut it for you. Women in particular were often targeted with these punishments, since gossiping was stereotypically blamed on them. In some towns, a convicted gossip might even be paraded through the streets wearing the bridle, turning them into a public spectacle of shame. Others were forced to sit in public stocks or dunked repeatedly into water as a warning to others. The irony is that while rulers and nobles used gossip and rumors as powerful political tools, ordinary townsfolk could be severely punished for the same thing. It shows how laws in the Middle Ages weren't just about maintaining peace, they were also about control, often aimed at silencing the powerless. Bans on certain shoes. Believe it or not, even the shoes people wore in medieval Europe could be controlled by law. One of the strangest fashions of the time was a type of long, pointed shoe called poulaine. These shoes became wildly popular among the wealthy during the 14th and 15th centuries. The tips were so exaggerated that some nobles wore them over 20 inches long, curling upward at the ends. Walking in them was difficult, and many people needed to tie the tips to their legs just to move around properly. The church soon stepped in, declaring these shoes not only impractical, but also sinful, as they were seen as symbols of vanity and pride. Religious leaders argued that poulaine distracted people from a humble life of faith. Kings and rulers also passed laws setting strict limits on shoe length, depending on your social status. For example, a simple townsman might only be allowed a few inches of shoe tip, while a noble could wear much longer ones as a sign of wealth and privilege. Weird marriage rules. In medieval Europe, the justice system was far from fair by today's standards. One of the most shocking practices was known as the trial by ordeal. When someone was accused of a serious crime like theft, witchcraft, or even treason, the courts often believed that God himself would reveal the truth through a dangerous physical test. If the accused survived unharmed, it was seen as proof of innocence. If not, well, their fate was sealed. There were several types of ordeals. One of the most famous was the ordeal by fire. The accused might be forced to hold a red-hot iron bar or walk barefoot across burning coals. Their hands or feet would then be bandaged and inspected after a few days. If the wounds healed cleanly, they were declared innocent. If not, guilt was assumed. Another brutal method was the ordeal by water. Here, the accused was tied up and thrown into a river or pond. If they floated, it was believed that the water was rejecting them, proving guilt. If they sank, they were considered innocent, though many drowned in the process. Hunting restrictions. In medieval England, even the forests were not truly free. Strict forest laws were put in place by kings to protect hunting grounds, especially after William the Conqueror introduced them in the 11th century. Deer, wild boar, and other large game animals were considered the property of the crown, and only nobles and royals had the privilege to hunt them. Commoners were banned from hunting these creatures, no matter how hungry their families might be. For ordinary people, the forest was meant to provide food, firewood, and survival. But under these laws, gathering wood, trapping small animals, or even carrying a bow could be seen as a crime if you were in the royal forest. Anyone caught poaching could face heavy fines, harsh beatings, or even death. In some cases, punishments included mutilation, like losing an eye or a hand to serve as a public warning. Trial by ordeal. Justice in the Middle Ages often looked more like a nightmare than a fair system. Instead of relying on evidence or witness testimony, many courts used something called trial by ordeal. The idea was simple, yet terrifying. God would reveal the truth by protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty. One common ordeal was the hot iron test. The accused had to carry a red-hot piece of iron or walk barefoot over burning coals. After a few days, a priest would examine the wounds. If the burns healed miraculously fast, the person was considered innocent. If not, they were declared guilty and punished. Another was the water ordeal. The accused would be tied up and thrown into a river or pond. If they sank, it meant the water had accepted them as innocent, though drowning was a very real risk. If they floated, it was seen as a rejection by nature itself, proving guilt. The medieval world may seem fascinating, but it was also filled with strange laws that remind us just how different life was centuries ago. From animals in courtrooms to bans on shoes and baths, people lived under rules that often make no sense to us today. But these laws also reveal how society worked, what people feared, and how leaders controlled their communities. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed learning about these unbelievable medieval laws, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating history videos. And tell us in the comments, which law shocked you the most?